On July 1st, 2000, an 8-year-old girl vanished from a field near her grandparents' home. 17 days later, England would never be the same. This is the story of a case that shook an entire nation. But what makes it different isn't the crime itself, it's what happened afterwards. Picture a summer afternoon in the English countryside, a wheat field taller than a child's head, the laughter of 4 kids playing hide and seek, the kind of place where parents believe their children are completely safe. Then, one child broke away from the group. She headed back to her grandparents' house first, and she never arrived. Within hours, all of England threw itself into a massive search. But no one knew this story would not end with a missing child. It would change the laws of an entire country. If you watch this video till the end, you'll understand how a tragedy can become real social change. And more importantly, you'll learn where the laws protecting children came from and why they matter so much. Because this story isn't just about a loss. It's about how one mother turned the greatest pain of her life into a shield for thousands of other children. The little girl's name was Sarah Payne. On July 1st, 2000, an 8-year-old girl vanished from a field near her grandparents' home. 17 days later, England would never be the same. It was a summer afternoon in the countryside of West Sussex, England, a peaceful place near the sea, with fields stretching to the horizon. Exactly the kind of place where parents believe their children are safe. 4 siblings were playing hide and seek near their grandparents' house. A laughter rang out across the wheat field taller than a grown man. An afternoon like any other. And then, one child broke away from the group. She headed back towards her grandparents' house first, and she never arrived. Within hours, the police launched an enormous search. It would become one of the largest search operations in modern English history. Hundreds of police officers, dozens of volunteers, an entire nation watching through their television screens. But no one knew that this story would not end with a missing child. It would change the laws of an entire country. The little girl's name was Sarah Payne. And that name would later be carved into a law that would protect thousands of other children she had never met. That's what made this case different. It wasn't only a tragedy. It was a moment a society was forced to look at itself. How could a child vanish in broad daylight, right near her family's home? Where was the system? And what happened during those 17 days? Sometimes, a loss doesn't only take a life. It exposes the gaps no one had been willing to look at before. To understand why this case shook England, we have to go back to that fateful afternoon. The afternoon at a field in Kingston Gorse. A wheat field, taller than a child. It was the perfect place to play hide and seek. And it was also where everything began. In the summer of 2000, Sarah Payne and her siblings came to stay at their grandparents' home. The house was in Kingston Gorse, West Sussex, a place near the sea with open land for children to run. For 4 kids, it was an ideal summer break. Wide spaces, fresh air, the kind of freedom only childhood knows. On the afternoon of July 1st, the 4 siblings played in the field near the house. The wheat was so tall, a child could disappear in just a few steps. Sarah broke away from the group. She decided to head back to her grandparents' house first. She slipped through a gap in the hedge out into the quiet country lane. That was the last time her siblings saw her. But what was later revealed in court is what truly sends a chill down the spine. Sarah's older brother said he saw a white van. It was leaving the area at the exact same moment. At the time, he was just a child at play. He had no idea that white van would become the central clue of this entire case. He had seen the most important thing of all, but no one could blame a child for not understanding what he saw. Danger to children rarely looks frightening. It doesn't arrive with a growl. It comes on an ordinary afternoon, in the place that seems the safest. When the family realized Sarah had not come back, a cold fear began to spread, and the race against time officially began. Within hours, the missing girl became national news, but time was not on their side. Around 7:45 in the evening on July 1st, Sarah was officially reported missing. She had been last seen in the field, only about 150 meters from her grandparents' home. At first, the police treated it as a lost child. Maybe she had wandered off. Maybe she was hiding somewhere in the field. They knocked on every door. They combed the surrounding area, but they found no trace of her. As night fell with no news, worry turned into real fear. By July 2nd, the search exploded in scale. Over 150 officers were deployed, along with about 80 local volunteers. The operation was named Operation Maple. They searched every field, every ditch, every bush, anywhere a child could be. Sarah's parents appeared before the cameras. They begged anyone with information to come forward. The image of those two desperate parents spread across England. An entire nation held its breath. Millions who had never met Sarah prayed for her to be found. But what the police began to suspect next sent the investigation down a darker path. Amid the flood of information, one detail surfaced: a white van, seen near the area where Sarah disappeared. When a child goes missing, every passing hour is gold. But with every one of those hours, the hope of finding her alive grew a little thinner. And the clue about the white van was about to lead the police to one man's door, a man who lived right nearby. Just one day after Sarah vanished, the police knocked on an apartment door. The man who answered had a frightening past. On July 2nd, the police received a tip about a suspicious white van. It had been seen near where Sarah disappeared, and that clue led them to a name: Roy Whitting. Whitting lived in Littlehampton, a nearby town. He drove a white van, and most important of all, he had a criminal record. When the police checked his file, they found something that turned their blood cold. In 1995, Whitting had been convicted. The charge was abduction and assault of a young girl. He was a sex offender already in the system. In other words, this was not a random stranger. This was a man the system already knew was a danger. A man who should have been closely monitored. The police brought him in for questioning. They pressed him on his alibi. They watched his every reaction. But here was the problem. They had no physical evidence linking him to Sarah. Forensic scientists combed his apartment, but found nothing solid enough. And under the law, without evidence, you cannot hold a person. After about 24 hours, the police were forced to release Whitting. Think about that for a second. The prime suspect, a convicted pedophile, released while this little girl was still missing. Sometimes the system knows exactly who the danger is, but knowing isn't enough. The law needs evidence, and evidence takes time, something Sarah no longer had. Whitting was released, but the police didn't take their eyes off him for a second, and what he did next would expose him on his own. An innocent person usually waits calmly to be cleared. Roy Whitting did the exact opposite. After being released, Whitting did not behave like an innocent man. The police began to notice strange things about him. He seemed oddly indifferent. While the whole country worried about Sarah, he appeared not to care whether she was found. To the investigators, that was a chilling sign. He also gave an alibi. He said he had been at a fun fair in a nearby town. A story that sounded ordinary enough, but the police didn't believe him. Something about the story didn't add up. Then, on July 21st, Whitting did something that set off every alarm. He stole a car, and he fled from the police. He sped up at over 70 miles an hour. He drove like a man running from something until he lost control and the car spun out. So ask yourself this: would an innocent person do that? Would a person with nothing to hide risk his life fleeing like that? That behavior didn't prove he was a killer, but it revealed a man in panic, a man trying to escape something. The truth has a way of revealing itself, sometimes not through testimony, but through the reactions of a person that they can't control. While Whiting pushed himself further into the crosshairs, the search for Sarah was reaching its end, and an end all of England feared to face. 17 days. That's how long all of England prayed for a miracle. On the 17th day, the miracle did not come. The search for Sarah went on without pause. With each passing day, hope grew a little thinner, but no one dared say out loud what they feared the most. And then, on July 17th, the search ended. Sarah's body was found in a field near Pulborough, about 15 miles from her grandparents' home. All of England, which had followed every single day, sank into grief. Now here we won't go into detail because she was a child, and her dignity matters more than any sensational details we can give you. But what you need to know is this: that moment turned the case from a search into a murder investigation. And the pressure on the police was now enormous. An entire nation demanded answers. Who did this, and how could it be proven? They had a suspect, Roy Whiting. But suspicion alone was not enough. In a courtroom, you need evidence beyond doubt. The problem was, at that point, the physical evidence was almost nothing. The suspect had already been released once. If there wasn't enough this time, he could walk free. For a family, the most painful moment sometimes isn't losing hope. It's knowing for certain that what you feared the most had come true. But the story wasn't over, because justice for Sarah would come from the unlikeliest of places. From a shoe by the side of the road, and a few strands of hair almost too small to see. This case was not cracked by a confession. It was cracked by things so small, almost no one would notice them. When investigating a case, the police know one thing: a killer always leaves a trace. The only question is whether you find it. First was a shoe. The police found it by the side of a road. Forensic testing confirmed the shoe belonged to Sarah. It was the first clue that mapped out the route of the abduction. Then the police searched Whiting's apartment again. They found a fuel receipt, a scrap of paper that seemed meaningless. But that gas station was near where the shoe was found. Suddenly, that little scrap became a link. But the strongest evidence was still ahead, and it was inside his own van. Forensic scientists examining the van, they found strands of hair, they found fibers, and they matched Sarah. This was exactly what the police needed: a physical thread tying the suspect directly to the victim. Each small piece began to fit together. The shoe, the fuel receipt, the hair, the fibers. On their own, fragile. Put together, undeniable. Criminals often believe they've wiped away every trace, but forensic science can see what the naked eye misses. A single hair can tell the whole truth. With the evidence in hand, the prosecutor decided to take Roy Whiting to trial, and the trial ahead would last 4 tense weeks. Whiting walked into court and declared himself innocent. But the jury was about to hear a completely different picture. The trial took place at Lewes Crown Court. It lasted 4 weeks. 4 weeks in which Sarah's family had to sit and relive the worst moment of their lives. Prosecutor Timothy Langdale led the case. He laid out each piece of evidence, cold and methodical. He called it enough pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Enough to establish guilt beyond reasonable doubt. The forensic evidence from the van, witness accounts of the white van, his evasion, and his flight from police, all of it fit together into a single picture. But the prosecution presented one more thing: Whiting's past. They brought up the 1995 conviction, the time he targeted another young girl. This was evidence of a pattern. This was not the first time he had done this. Whiting denied it to the end. He kept a calm exterior. He insisted he was innocent from start to finish. But the pieces don't lie, and Matt, no matter how clever, struggles to hide the truth when the evidence piles up. Justice rarely comes from a dramatic moment like in the movies. It comes from patience, from fitting each small piece of truth together until there is no room for doubt. On December 12, 2001, after 4 weeks, the jury withdrew to deliberate. And when they returned, the words would change Whiting's life forever. After 4 weeks of trial, the jury needed only one word to seal Whiting's fate: guilty. On December 12, 2001, Roy Whitting was convicted for the abduction and murder of Sarah Payne. The courtroom fell silent in the moment the verdict was read. For Sarah's family, it was the final confirmation. The man who took their daughter would pay. Whitting was sentenced to life in prison. Judge Richard Curtis did not hide his contempt. He looked straight at Whitting, and he called him a cunning man, a glib liar. These are words a judge rarely uses, but for this case, they were entirely deserved. At first, the minimum term was set at 50 years, which meant Whitting would almost certainly die in prison. Later, through an appeal, the minimum term was reduced to 40 years. But that number still meant one thing. He would never be a danger to another child again. A sentence cannot return what was lost. It cannot bring Sarah home. It cannot erase those 17 days of horror. But it affirms something important, that the life of a child had value. That evil, no matter how well hidden, must eventually pay. But Sarah's story did not end in the courtroom, because her mother was about to do something extraordinary. She was about to turn the greatest pain in her life into something that could protect other children. Most cases close when the killer goes to prison. This one was different. This was when it truly began to change everything. Sarah Payne was Sarah's mother. After losing her child, she had every reason to collapse, but she chose a different path. She refused to let her daughter become just another tragedy in the news. She wanted Sarah's death to mean something, so she began a campaign that started from one simple question. Why don't parents have the right to know? In her child's case, the killer was a sex offender already on record. The system knew he was dangerous, but the families around him had no idea. Sarah Payne wanted to change that. She wanted parents to have the right to ask the police, the right to know whether a person in contact with their child had a record of child abuse. Her campaign lasted years. It faced controversy, doubt, and fears about consequences, but she did not give up. And then the extraordinary happened. Her efforts led to the creation of Sarah's Law. The law was officially introduced in England and Wales on April 4th, 2011. It allows parents to ask the police about the risk posed by a specific person in contact with their child. For an American audience, this is close to the idea of Megan's Law, a law also born from the tragedy of a child. And the results were real. In the first year alone, Sarah's Law helped protect more than 200 children from known offenders. This is the most extraordinary part of the whole story. A mother lost her own daughter, but through that very pain, she saved hundreds of other children she had never met. While Sarah's Law protected children out there, the man who killed her was facing a different kind of justice, a kind that came inside prison walls. Whitting thought prison would be a place to hide from the world, but he was wrong. Inside, he was one of the most hated men there. Roy Whitting was transferred to His Majesty's Prison Wakefield, a maximum security prison in England, home to around 600 of the country's most dangerous inmates. People called the place by a chilling nickname, Monster Mansion. In the world of prison, there is an unwritten law. Those who harm children sit at the very bottom of that order. And Whitting soon discovered this. In 2002, not long after he arrived, an inmate slashed his face with a razor. He carried a scar on his right cheek from then on. In 2011, a far more serious attack came. Another inmate stabbed him in the eye with a sharpened toilet brush handle. But it didn't stop there. In February of 2024, Whitting was attacked again. He was seriously wounded inside the prison. After that, a man was brought to court charged with attempting to murder him. Looking back at this whole story, there is one thing we should remember. Don't let the killer's name be the thing you remember the most. Remember Sarah, an 8-year-old girl who once played hide and seek with her siblings on a summer afternoon. And remember her mother, the woman who turned the greatest loss into a shield for other children. The Sarah Payne case leaves a question England still debates today. How do you balance a parent's right to know against the risk of mob vengeance? That question, even now, has no complete answer. So what do you think about Sarah's Law? Should it be adopted in more places? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you think this story deserves to be known by more people, leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next story.